Welcome to Playing with Fire, the podcast for people who are ready to custom build their love.
We're talking about non-monogamy, however you design it, as an individuation opportunity.
Want to leave the default and make your life spectacularly you? You're in the right place.
Jolie, you had something that you wanted to talk about today. What you got?
Well, I got a question recently that reminded me of something that needs to be talked about, but we avoid a lot, which is money. And how money, right? I mean, of course, this is not news, right? What are the hardest things to talk about in our relationships? It tends to be things like money, sex, religion, politics, and money in particular. For many people that I work with, money feels like it's okay. Like we handle this, it's fine. Like we figured out our system. We know how we're handling, agency and autonomy around money. And then when we start opening up, all of a sudden a whole set of new questions enter the playing field, but generally people don't even recognize that the questions show up. So a lot of times I see people get into really painful spots where there's resentment building, there's tension building, and they don't even know what exactly is adding into it, because we can actually hide, money is often in the shadows for us. And so we can hide from even the fact that money has a part in this whole resentment and the ick that's coming up for us. And on the other hand, sometimes, and the question I got recently was from somebody who said that they were taking the long road. They're like, we're planning to open, but they're doing a long plan. They know that they have a lot of stuff that they need to straighten out. They have a very long-term marriage, over 3 decades together, and they want to do this really well. And so they asked me, what are some of the things that they should think about? And there are a lot. There's a lot. But one of them that gets missed is, how are you going to handle money and questions about money as it relates to dating, non-monogamy, as it relates to you both gaining more agency and experiences that are separate from each other? What are you going to do? And I loved that they were approaching it with this eye towards, well, we don't know what we don't know. Because that's when I think back to our early days.
Yeah, we don't know what we don't know. That is a really good starting point.
Right. It is. So when you and I were first together, money was also an issue. And we jumped right into, we went from friendship where money was already an issue. I didn't know it, but money was already in the subtext of the triad that I was going to join, but I didn't know I was going to join, was that we as friends already had some discrepancies in how we handled money and how we handled things like picking up groceries for each other, or taking each other out to dinner, or inviting each other over to dinner. And how does the expenditure that we make on each other feel? And I didn't know that until I was living with the two of you, that that hadn't felt good necessarily back and forth for a while, or it's not to everybody equally.
Yep.
And I knew that I had some feelings about it, but I didn't know that all of us did. We all did. And then it got much more intense. So if you do happen to take the route of jumping from the frying pan into the fire, I don't recommend it. I went straight from a monogamous marriage into a triad inside of 45 days. I don't necessarily recommend that. Like a full-on living together triad.
Yeah.
And so we really didn't know what we didn't know, and nobody was asking us these questions. So I have tons of questions that I bring up when I'm thinking about taking a relationship to a more intimate level, because money is going to interact with so much of what we're doing in our dating.
So what are some of those questions?
Well, right off the bat, how do you handle money in a current couplehood? How do you handle money right now? Is it something that you can currently talk about with ease, or is it something that you struggle over? And do you have all your finances combined, or do you already have separate finances?
Yeah. So that's an interesting point. If you're coming into an established couple constellation, whatever it might be, what are the money conversations like within that that set of relationships that you're entering into?
Right. Because
knowing what that is it's going to inform what you do.
And there are things that I would ask if I were going back in time to ask you and our other partner. I would have asked questions about, well, how do the two of you talk about money? Who handles money currently?
Mhm.
Do you both? And how does that all work? Because now we're talking about joining forces and
Yeah.
what's going to happen. And instead, we all found out the information piecemeal over time.
Yeah.
And that wasn't, oh, it's just gentle and we'll figure it out over time. It was instead, we found it out when things felt horrible. And when it was finally so horrible or so dangerous, because money has a lot to do with our survival in this capitalist landscape that we live in. So it had to cross a threshold of discomfort or danger for any of us to bring it up and have a really direct conversation. And a lot of people that I meet they're like, well, we already have separate finances. And I think if you do, you might imagine that this will be very simple. You have separate finances, so you'll just handle all of the things going forward with separate finances. But having separate finances looks a lot of different ways to a lot of different people. For some people, that means, well, we each have our own account. We share an account for shared expenses. For some people, that means, no, we don't even live together, so none of our expenses are shared. For some of us, it's multiple levels of overlap and separateness where we have some shared accounts, we have some joint accounts, we have some shared business interests, we have some shared expenses, some separate expenses.
It can get very complicated.
Right. And so now
interwoven.
throw dating in.
Mhm.
And dating introduces a set of money concerns. Even the simplest dates introduce money concerns. You know, if I'm going to go for a walk in the park, and that's literally all I'm doing. Well, I can walk to my local park, and I can go for a walk with someone who has chosen to generally drive there, right? And spend the money to get in a car and drive there, or gotten on public transportation to get there. Because I don't live in an area where even just getting into proximity with someone is generally not free. And then we have on top of that all the, but dating also is about, going out and doing things and presenting ourselves in certain ways. So all of a sudden, we start noticing that dating introduces questions of how we spend money, and that instantly touches on, where are my values showing up in this relationship? How am I feeling valued? Because where you see someone spend money, then there are a whole bunch of unconscious and conscious judgments and discernment about, like, well, what do I think about that? What does it mean that they're willing to spend money?
Yeah, we talk with people fairly frequently about time spent with other people and how jealousy comes up around it, and all the other things that come up around time spent with other people. And this feels like a very similar conversation, adding in the cultural freight that money comes with.
Right. So we have cultural freight, the actual survival impact it has, like the impact that it has on your
real.
life. There's real impact. And then all of our own money baggage, our personal money baggage, right? So the collective shadow of money, the personal shadow of money, and our actual lived experience of how safe and how secure are we financially at a time in life right now where things are pretty damn complicated in the money world for the vast majority of people.
Mm-hmm.
So I like to take this topic. I in an ideal world, people would talk about this early and regularly. But I find people tend to put off talking about it, and then talk about it only when it gets super, super uncomfortable, or even worse, when they feel like they're in the one down position. They're in the position where they can say, you're doing this wrong. And so they finally bring it up with their partner. It's hard to look at it and say, hey, maybe this is unbalanced, or maybe this is causing an impact, when you're feeling like you're the one getting the advantage. And these advantages and disadvantages, the way this all feels, it's personal. Everybody feels differently about it, and it can come from so many directions. It's not just about how much money each of you have and how you arrange that in a particular dyad, but also how money interacts with your values. And then now you have new people entering the picture. It's not just about money going out. It's also about, oh, what happens if somebody now is dating someone who has a lot of money to spend on them? What happens now? Most recently, when I was working with somebody with this issue, they partnered with someone who had houses all over the globe, like 5 different places they could go easily. And that was just, hey, I'm going to be in this country. Do you want to come with me? Their partner, meanwhile, was working from home. Their life had gotten incredibly small, so they're now living a very jet-setting experience at least once a month, at no additional cost to them, other than maintaining their passport and stuff. There's costs, but not a significant one. And their partner's like, wait a minute, I feel so left behind. So talk about jealousy, right? Talk about a mode for jealousy to come in, because jealousy is a feeling of threat to a valued relationship. Well, if your metamor has all of these particularly financial resources to pour in a particular direction, you can feel excluded, left out, but also in threat. Like, what does that mean?
Yeah,
So,
an aspect of relationship is, so what am I bringing to this relationship? I mean, I think about it and I feel it all the time. What am I bringing? And if someone comes along and brings more of what I'm bringing, like, okay, am I superfluous now?
yeah,
Which, I mean, it is so easy to start thinking that way. And like so many other things we've talked about recently, backing out a level, taking a wider view of the whole relationship. It's so easy to like pinpoint the one thing that is scary
well,
and
that's what
make
fear
it.
does, right?
Yeah, right. It's like, that's important, and I'm going to forget about everything else and just focus on this. And that's particularly difficult when there's nothing we can do about it. Like, that's just the situation.
Right. And when we're talking about, agency and money, there's the additional, like, well, what's happened before in this relationship?
Oh
How
yeah,
has
the
money
history. Hmm.
come up? What's the historical data? So you and I grew up in 2 very different experiences. I grew up, my parents lived less than paycheck to paycheck. It was really dicey. There were bankruptcies involved. We did always have food on the table because my parents farmed. There was always food on the table and food put up, like lots of food preservation, things like that. But I never, I mean, I started buying my own clothes at 12 when I was babysitting. I started like having responsibilities like that. You
So
grew up
your history with money involves a storyline of
of lack and
challenge, of
fear.
lack. Hmm.
Yeah, and fear, and also like really erratic and argumentative behavior. So my parents could not talk about money. My family, like, it was known that it was a huge problem. My mother struggled with it, but also was the one left in charge of money. It was like she struggled with it deeply, but she was the one tasked with managing all the money in the house. It was really, really complicated my whole life. So much so that by the time I was 18, I was handling their finances to get them out of that. And I did, but yeah, it leaves me with a huge money complex, like lots
Right.
of stuff around that. And you grew up in a much more
Whereas,
stable
yep,
and quiet environment, as far as I remember.
it was a stable environment as far as, well, basically everything. And money was never a topic. It was never an issue. There wasn't. I felt no fear or concern about money along the way when stuff
Talk about
happened.
privilege.
I mean, so much. And I think back to the time, and this is the 70s, so it's a different economic time, and both parents worked, and that was enough to make us just, money wasn't a topic of discussion because it didn't need to be. Yeah,
Right.
massive privilege. And now I think about the economic circumstances we live in, and the fact that we both have
Yeah, we both
careers
work. Doesn't,
does not
yeah.
mean we don't think about money at all. And now I have no idea what conversations they had, but there was nothing obvious that we lacked along the way.
And so
So
that kind
that's
of
the history that
historical
I
data. When we
brought
talk
to
about
us.
historical
Yeah.
data, that's when I stop to
Yeah.
think, how is money probably going to either become a trigger, or how is money already a trigger in my relationships? Like, how does it already come up? I start back there. Like, how was money held and how did it feel when I was growing up? Now, fast forward to, okay, where are you now? How do you work with money now? And, immediately when we're talking about established dyads trying to figure out how they're going to handle dating and money, we got to talk about, okay, yeah, first off, what counts as a date even? What are we talking about when we say dating and money? Signing up for a paid dating app, signing up to take a class about non-monogamy, signing up to work with a coach and a coach on non-monogamy, or a coach because you all of a sudden recognize, oh, like, I don't know how to date. So
Yep.
I'm going to go work with somebody to build my confidence, or going back to therapy because you realize, oh, this made things pretty rocky. Like, do these things count as part of our non-monogamy expenses? Or is this part of our household? Where does this fall?
Right. And there aren't
And that's before
answers.
we even get to taking somebody out for dinner or taking somebody on vacation. Yeah.
And there aren't clear answers to those questions, but the trick is to ask them, like, what matters?
Right.
And what feels like it falls into this realm of non-monogamy relating versus, well, this is just life. It doesn't, whether I did this or not, this is how I would spend my money. So so how do you encourage people to have these conversations?
Well, I mean, first, you follow basic protocol around these are tender conversations. So there's a really fine line to walk, because we can keep looking for a perfect time, right? The right time to talk about this. And often what happens is, so we can't talk about it when somebody's dysregulated. We can't talk about it when we're having another fight or other things are bothering us. But then when things are good and things feel okay and everybody's regulated, I don't want to rock the boat now.
Yeah.
So now we just never have the conversations.
Yeah,
the first thing is actually scheduling it and deciding we're going to set aside time to do this. I feel like it is a conversation that I often wind up having with people because they need a third party in the room. They need somebody to actually guide them through the thinking about this. And it does frequently bring up old hurts, old stuff, right? So we also need to have a parking lot and understand that sometimes what's going to happen is we open this can of worms and, it is wiggly. It is a lot. And it may bring up things that now need to be dealt with tools like an imago dialogue, or doing a formal apology process, or making restitution. But we still have to have the conversation.
The conversations have to get started, and then, which is expensive enough. And then you have to have them.
Emotionally expensive. Yeah.
Emotionally expensive. Yeah.
And
it's a confusing word in this conversation.
And sometimes expensive. I have plenty of people who are like, I would love to work with you privately on these conversations. They'd like to work with me. My work, it is expensive to hire someone to walk you through these things, which is part of why I do group work, so I can help people and, get them, at least the information and the bottom line, the details of, like, where do we need to explore, and also provide some emotional support around, it's normal that these things are hard. You're not alone.
For sure.
It's really helpful to be in a group environment where you can talk about, like, oh, this is hard. And it can be hard from lots of different directions. Even if money isn't a huge piece of your struggle, just bringing this up can illuminate where there are power differentials at work, where there's a lot of asymmetry, where there's a sense of unfairness, where resentment has built up over years, or where it can bring up what we just don't talk about. Because all of a sudden, if we're going to talk about money, we may also find that now we're talking about all the unpaid labor that's going on in our relationship. Right. That's not just householding. That's also who's the relationship administrator, who's scheduling relationship meetings, who's handling, making sure that we get new information, who's teaching who all the time, who's acting in that educator role all the time, who's holding space to process feelings. Is it both of us or is it one of us? So all of those things, right? Sometimes we think about money and we think just about the things we can point to as expenses, but what about all that unpaid emotional stuff that goes on? So money opens up a lot of ground. So maybe we should tack back though to getting a little bit practical about when you're talking about money in regards to especially the dating aspect. Like, okay, we're
Okay,
going to start going out of the house that we share, or we're going to start having experiences. If you don't live together, we're going to start having experiences that, yes, they take time as a resource, right? But now also they're going to impact financially. I find it to be helpful to individually go through and think for yourself, like, what counts? What sort of activities count as dates? Does it count as a date if I go meet somebody for coffee? I have a local coffee shop that I love, and I frequently go on first dates there because I love coffee as a first date because 45 minutes you can temp check and leave. But I go there anyways. So for the purposes of my life, is going for coffee an expense for me that I just have in my life? Or does that count as a date because I went there with someone? And does it only count as a date if I pay for their coffee? Where's the line? And this is a question I like to start with because it really drills down into how simple and how messy things can get with just a simple, like, ooh, yeah, I don't know. Does it count as a date if I go for a whole meal? Does it count as a date if I go to do an activity? What happens if I thought the activity wasn't going to cost anything and then it does? So I go on an accidental date. I've had that happen before.
An accidental date. Absolutely. I mean, sometimes those are the best. Like, oh,
Yeah.
hey, cool.
Yeah.
But when I think about that for myself, I think, well, all right. So what money could you spend? Like doing like what under what circumstances would you spend money, and then I would feel sort of resentful about it? Because I feel like that's one of the problems with or one of the challenges of money is the way we often judge or have opinions about how money should be spent.
Right. And this goes in both directions because actually I can't imagine you getting resentful about me spending money on my dating. But I have seen you get resentful about the money you spend on your own dating.
Okay, yeah, that's accurate.
Because you struggle to have spend money on enjoyable experiences for yourself. So I'm just saying it really does get messy in there.
Yes, it does.
But when we start thinking about what counts as dating, okay, is it food and drinks and activities that you do with others? And if so, where's the line? So if I go out with a friend, does that count as dating? Does that count as something else? And the reason this matters to me is many people have some level of combined finances. And as they start dating, they may need to realize like, oh, we actually need to have a level of privacy that comes with having some separate funds because you know what? Yeah, when I go out, I mean, my friendships and my romantic relationships and my sexual relationships, it's really none of your business what those are, especially financially. So I want that to be separate. That's what works for me. I want that to be separate and come out of my money. But not everybody, does that. And not everybody even knows, like, well, what does that mean? How do we do this that feels good? Because also then the judgment comes in of, well, what counts? How about if I'm dating someone and they ski and I haven't been skiing. Like I know how to, but I haven't been. And so I go and I invest in all the gear that I need to start skiing again. Is that me picking up a hobby that I used to have? And like, sure, we would typically count that as an expense in our household, or is that me investing in a relationship with someone else?
And what do you do with the answer to that question?
It really depends, but most of the people that I have walked through this process, they realize, oh, we need to have private accounts. We need to allow each other to have private accounts. And this is where stuff starts to get pretty messy around, how do we fund those accounts? Because what if there's a huge disparity in our income? What if our access to financial resources is unequal? And it might not just be income. Sometimes our financial security comes from having access to emergency funds from our parents. And so feeling like we can play closer to the edge Like, oh, it's okay. I can play closer to the edge because, yeah, I got backup. Or
Yeah.
sometimes our financial security comes from never having had any worries about money and just like, I don't know, it'll work out. So we don't mind running credit and just like, it'll work out. And it always seems to. Like,
Yeah.
this really is
So again, the
complicated.
history comes up and informs how it feels, is what I hear. Because to some extent, like, there is a way to look at money that's just pure math.
Yeah. Or pure energy. Sure. We
Like,
could.
I
Except that's
just,
not how it feels.
and it is not how it feels. And you and I have had our interesting times around this, because you would think I would approach it from the pure math side, that
Yeah.
being kind of my background with all my math and science and whatnot. But I 100% have not.
No.
And
No,
the
there's a reason why I handle our household finances.
because I can't be trusted to do the math. It's so what this brings up for me is yes, the each person's relationship with money and capitalism, and how life force is manifested in money, how it's used that way, and then our values are going to come into this.
Right. And judgment enters, the picture too, because
Mhm.
again, like, how do I judge how you choose to spend money? Some people really enjoy the experience of going out to eat and really feel like that is money well spent. And other people feel like that's atrocious. And those people are often in partnership with each other,
Uh-huh.
right? And so
Yeah.
now if I go and I have that experience with someone new, wait, I thought we agreed that we don't do that because we don't like, no, maybe that wasn't a we thing. Maybe that was a
Mhm.
you thing.
Yeah.
And then, depending on how many responsibilities you have, there's the actual overlap of, well, what happens? What if we share children and we need a babysitter in order for both of us to be out? Or whose responsibility
Oh,
is
yeah,
it?
yeah.
Like, do we trade off? What
Yeah.
happens there? I mean,
Oh, it can
inc-
get you can get some very interesting philosophical situations
right,
that require a lot of introspection to say what matters to me here.
right.
And then,
And
because it's a relationship, what matters to you?
and the idea that it's all going to be the same is ridiculous.
Oh
It
yeah,
won't.
it will not.
It won't. At the very least, we just will not have the same access to the same exact experiences. Even the people I know who are coupled, who are dating as a couple and date another couple as their primary dating experience, even within that experience, you're not like likely there are asymmetries and feelings of like, well, this like it lines up, this feels better or worse for me. Like any asymmetry in the emotional realm can also lead us to feel like it's more or less worth investing in the dates and the hotels and the travel to see these people, right? And then there's the time too, right? So oftentimes we have different access to free time, which
Hmm.
is another resource. So my schedule is much more amenable than most of the people that I date. So I often wind up being the one to travel to them more. I also impact my home schedule much more for dating than other people because I can. That hasn't caused a huge problem for us, but I imagine back into, I don't have to look back very far, but when the kids were young, yeah, of course, every time I left was an impact because
Yeah.
now
Right.
I'm impacting the whole house and who needs care and who I was homeschooling, so who needs educational care as well as regular care. And then there's the kind of all the expenses that come up because different people like to love on people in different ways. Are you the kind of person who likes to buy gifts
Hmm.
or who feels like, do you derive a sense of value by picking up the check? Do you like, how does that feel for you?
Oh yeah. Okay. That's an important factor into
Like, are
this.
you
Is
doing
yeah.
it for
How?
the other person or are
Mhm.
you doing it
How?
because you love it?
Yep. How does it
Yeah.
feel? How do you want to show up? Is it for you? Is it for them? Are you trying to impress, or are you just? So we've made it pretty clear. I think we made a good case for the fact that this is complicated. That there are a lot of.
I know I've just mostly offered questions,
Yep.
but I can't
So
offer answers. I can say setting up separate accounts so that you start practicing. For one thing, if you're super enmeshed right now, having some separate finances is wise.
A little financial differentiation.
Yes, exactly. But that brings with it the question of like, where is the funding for these accounts coming from? And it's not always straightforward and simple, and it's not always an even experience. You know, when our income and revenue sources don't match, what do we do with that?
Yeah.
But also, even if you have separate accounts and you do that well, there are so many discussions that can be incredibly intimacy building to dig into. How does this make you feel? Like, why is this bringing up big feelings for you? What's going on there? Like, I've never seen you get uncomfortable about the money that I spend dating. I've never witnessed it. That doesn't mean you haven't.
Okay.
You may have.
Right. So there are questions.
Now I'm curious. Have you?
Not to my knowledge, but not to my knowledge. One of the things that happens when you have those intimacy building conversations is very often everybody learns something. So you might ask me a question in a way that leads me to discover the parts of me that have been unhappy or affected in some way by the way you spend money dating that I'm not even aware of until the right question is asked.
Yeah.
So there's so much potential for intimacy and for getting to know each other better.
And self-intimacy.
Yeah.
And I like to have money conversations at a cadence too. Like, how often are we going to review this? So over the last, let's see. So over the last almost 16 years that we've been together, the financial situation has changed, I don't know, 150,000 times. It's ridiculous.
Right? Yeah.
No, but in that time, we have owned businesses together. We've closed businesses together. We have had, we've raised children together. We bought a house together. We've dealt with deaths and losses, which meant both investment, but also getting some money, and also school and going to school, and only one of us going to school. And then 1,000 children going to school, and all of those things, all of that financial history has meant that we have to keep coming back and revisiting this. And I think we have a lot of autonomy in money, but we also have an incredible amount of shared responsibility.
Yes.
So even though we both have access to the money that we need for day to day and the money we need for emergencies, plus we both have viable earning revenue, opportunities. But we don't necessarily have a similar experience of, well, what happens when money feels icky between us?
Right.
Like, when money feels icky between us, I'm really impacted. I feel icky, and I'm likely to let that impact our relationship. So I need to have these conversations regularly.
Make sure you're keeping that clear.
Yeah, I have to keep that channel clear. Whereas you seem to be able to really let it ride for quite a while without any huge impact to you. But I've noticed that as people are going through especially if you're going from the hyper enmeshed phase of life into a more autonomous phase, and dating, and then potentially having other long-term partners that you're building life with as well, maybe not the same way, but building life with. What happens, how you have to revisit both from the stuff that happens that has nothing to do with non-monogamy and the stuff that comes in, like, who's making decisions about finances? Because you and I went from being friends who definitely, like, we had overlapping expenses. We bought groceries for each other. We shared gardens together. We did all kinds of things that
it was overlapped
our finances. But there was also this clarity of like, well, we have separate households and we don't sit down and have money talks together. And then we bought a house together. That was just, it wasn't that long.
Okay, you say that, and I'm like, yeah, right. So we went from not having money conversations to owning a house.
Right. And
we didn't actually have much of the way of money conversations leading up to that.
Right. And then
We were responding to the exigencies of life and
exactly,
trying
everything
to
was happening
solve
so fast. We
problems.
started doing stuff.
Yeah.
And I often see people, even just in the dating realm, like now, if you're dating someone seriously, what happens if they have trouble? What happens? Like, how are you going to hold
yeah.
your boundaries if they're having trouble? How do you feel responsible? What's your stance on community care? Because you provided me immense care in the first year of our relationship. And also didn't talk to me about it. So it was really scary
Yes.
because
And
I didn't know what was happening.
Yep.
And so it was scary for both of
So
us.
there
We
was
didn't
no
know what was going
commitment.
on.
There was just this support that could have disappeared at any moment because I didn't tell you what I was doing.
Right.
Very
And then
scary.
it turned out it was building up resentment in our other partner, like big resentment.
And I
but
wasn't
that
talking to
getting
them
voiced
about
either.
this. So
It was,
right. My top suggestion out of all of this is talk about money
and regularly.
Regularly. And there's two reasons for this, at least. And one is, so I have approached money as a problem to be solved. And so whenever money issues come up, I feel it as a problem to be solved, which, it is. It tends to be that there are problems that come up and they need solving. But the underneath that, and in some ways, I think more important is, for me, the relation. This is relating. This is like a really deep way of relating to people. It's one of the reasons that people don't talk about finances between households. It's because it's too intimate.
It feels too intimate.
It's considered an intimate thing. And we don't talk about money because that's just for us. But I'm not saying that's a good thing. What I'm saying is it's a reflection of the fact that money is an intimate topic because we just automatically, I think, instinctively feel, oh, you're going to know a lot about me if you know how I deal with money.
I hear the huge subjective confession.
Oh, completely.
In there.
Yeah. That's why I'm saying it.
So, yeah. And I think it's important to also name that there are other ways to do this.
Absolutely.
There are, but most of us aren't living in like chosen family that has chosen to also overlap this way. Like we talk about how, relating to people, introducing sensuality and sexuality is often the big thing on our minds. Overlapping money is the thing that really changed everybody's life when we started engaging in a triad. Then when I have been dating, the thing that I find most builds intimacy is, am I investing in this new relationship? I'm building intimacy with that person by starting to have financial conversations, by starting to engage with them in ways that impact both of us financially. And being willing to have those conversations and face socioeconomic differences and look right at privilege is incredibly intimacy and community building, and therefore often really scary. So I see people want to just let's just find ways to not have to do that. So they create structures so that they just don't have to, or they create rules for their relationship so we just don't have to do that. Like, we'll only ever do it this way. But life has a way, and I really do recommend people dig past the exactly what they think is going to happen into what might happen. What is it possible to have happen? And these are personal questions as well as questions to have with each other. So
And
if you're on your own right now, or you're between partners, or you're dating a bunch of partners more casually, and you don't have anybody that you are having these questions as a mutual thing, these are all valuable questions to start understanding. How do you want this to be? What would feel good for you? What do you imagine would feel good for you? And start grounding into that knowledge.
Hey, I appreciate you calling out my subjective confession, which really was me just talking about myself and my perspective, my opinion. I heard myself saying we over and over. Like, everybody has their own stuff that they bring to this, and you just heard a bunch of mine. And I think that's kind of, while I sort of, regret it, like, I'm not sure that all belongs out here, but as an example of, not just that everybody's different, but a lot of times Well, I have fallen into the trap, and I've seen other people do it too, of assuming that my experience is like yours, and yours is like mine, and so I don't even have to ask the questions because we all agree on this, right? No, no, that's not a good starting point for these conversations. The starting point is, well, how does this work for you? And I could tell you how it works for me, and that can be helpful, but I need to know, well, how does it work for you?
And that is, yes, thank you for claiming that and saying it. And that's not just with long-term partnerships. I mean,
Oh,
with short-term, with new partnerships, it's also with long-term
oh, I
partnerships.
see what you're saying. Yeah.
Because often we think, okay, I need to know that I don't know this new person, but yeah, so many of us, we set up the basics of how power is distributed in our relationships and how money and all of that, how it works in the first few months. And then life has happened and things have changed. Are you willing to look at this with fresh eyes? Are you willing to also set aside the fact that you have a way you think that you both experience
Mhm.
this and
Yeah.
actually be in the, like, will you let them be different than you think they are?
Oh, that is a good one.
It is really hard to do.
Right. And I know, one of the reasons is that I lean on you. I lean on my expectation of who you are.
Yeah.
And if I find out that you're not that anymore, because we change, we grow, I don't want to know that. I just want to lean on you and not have to think about it. But then, uh, um, but if you have changed, I need to know what I can lean on you for and how it works.
Well, it begs the question, who are you having a relationship with?
Yes.
Exactly. If
Right.
you are leaning on me, in big air quotes, but it's actually the version of me that you imagine to persist
Yep.
rather than who I experience myself as and who I would like you to see me as and how I would like to be interacting with you. There are always going to be compromises to be made around, like, the way that we make decisions together or, the things that we decide to prioritize. But in order to love each other well, we need to allow each other to become more and more ourselves over the years.
Right.
And that's going to mean needing to reintroduce yourself to your partner over and over and over again. Oh, we have another episode coming up. We haven't recorded it yet, but did you see it on the topics list?
What are you talking about? This one?
Rituals for introducing yourself to your partner when you've changed.
That's awesome.
Very good topic. Okay, that one will come up soon.
All right.
Okay, Ken, thanks so much for talking money with me.
Thank you.
There's no one right way to design your relationship. And lots of people, actually about 25%, according to a recent national survey, are interested in some type of open relationship. But how do you know if you are ready to open up happily? Not everyone is, and that's no problem. I've got a 60-second quiz that will give you the answer. And even better, you'll walk away with your next step, whether you're good to go or not so much when it comes to opening up. And this is no BuzzFeed nonsense. I personally designed this quiz from my years of academic research. Go to joliequiz.com. That's JOLIQUIZ.com and find out if you're ready to open up happily and what to do if you are or if you're not.